Look at your life right now and don't romanticize it. Look at the parts you keep postponing, the parts you keep explaining, the parts you keep hoping will somehow fix themselves. Now here's the truth that cuts through all of it, clean and cold. When you realize you're alone, you become unstoppable. And I don't mean alone in a tragic, dramatic way. I mean alone in the only way that matters. Alone with your choices, your discipline, your standards, your habits, your future. Alone with the fact that nobody can think for you, nobody can train for you, nobody can control your impulses for you, nobody can carry the weight of your life in your body. People can love you, support you, even believe in you, but they still can't do the work for you. And once you accept that, something inside you stops begging. It stops waiting. It stops bargaining. Because most people live in a waiting room. They wait for motivation. They wait for confidence. They wait for the right time. They wait for someone to understand them. They wait for the perfect friend, the perfect mentor, the perfect partner, the perfect opportunity that finally makes discipline feel easy. And the waiting feels harmless because it doesn't look like failure. It looks like planning. It looks like patience, but it's not patience. It's avoidance wearing nice clothes. The moment you realize you're alone, the fantasy collapses. No one is coming to tap you on the shoulder and hand you your life back. No one is coming to rescue your consistency. No one is coming to protect your focus. No one is coming to enforce your boundaries. And as brutal as that sounds, it's actually the moment you get your power back, because now you stop outsourcing your future to things you can't control. That loneliness you feel sometimes, it's not always a problem. Sometimes it's your initiation. Sometimes it's life removing the noise so you can finally hear the truth. And the truth might be uncomfortable. You've been leaking energy into approval, into fitting in, into being understood, into staying connected to people and patterns that keep you average. You've been paying a hidden tax just to belong, and the bill is always the same. It costs you your edge. So in this episode, we're going to use that aloneness the right way, not to become bitter, not to become cold, but to become free, to turn solitude into clarity, to turn silence into skill, to turn the absence of support into the presence of self-respect. Because once your strength becomes internal, you stop being controlled by attention, by rejection, by people's moods, by the need to be seen. You start moving with a quiet force that doesn't require witnesses. If you're ready for that shift, stay with me, because the first thing we need to expose is the hidden price of belonging and how it quietly steals your potential without you noticing. Belonging has a hidden tax, and most people pay it quietly, like it's just the normal cost of being social, being liked, being easy to be around. But the truth is, the price isn't small, and it's not paid in money. It's paid in your edge. It's paid in your honesty. It's paid in the parts of you that don't fit neatly into the room. Think about how early you learn this. You say the thing that's true, and you feel the room tighten. You show ambition, and someone jokes about it to shrink it. You grow, and people start acting like you're doing too much. So, you adjust. Not because you're fake, because you're human. You want connection. You want to belong. And belonging feels safe. It feels like protection. It feels like oxygen. But what nobody tells you is that most groups don't want your best self. They want your predictable self. They want the version of you they already understand. The version that makes them feel comfortable. And that comfort has rules. Don't outgrow us too fast. Don't raise the standard too high. Don't become so disciplined that it exposes our laziness. Don't become so focused that it makes our distractions look childish. Don't become so brave that it forces us to look at our own fear. So the bargain starts. You shrink without announcing it. You soften the language of your goals. You downplay your work ethic. You hide the intensity. You become chill. You become low maintenance. You become agreeable. And you call it maturity when really it's a slow leak of your potential. This is why loneliness is often the beginning of strength. Because the moment you realize you're alone, you stop bargaining. You stop trying to be digestible. You stop trying to make your dreams sound reasonable to people who never even try. You stop handing your vision to a crowd and asking them to approve it. And notice what happens when you stop needing approval. You get your energy back. You get your time back. You get your focus back. Your mind becomes quieter because it's not constantly doing social math. How do I say this without sounding intense? How do I act so nobody feels weird? How do I stay connected even if it costs me? That social math is exhausting. It drains people for years, and then they wonder why they don't have the energy to build the life they want. They spent it all maintaining a version of themselves that kept everyone else comfortable. This doesn't mean you become arrogant. It means you become honest. It means you stop confusing connection with permission. You stop confusing being liked with being aligned. Because being liked is easy. Alignment is costly. Alignment requires you to tolerate misunderstanding. It requires you to be okay with being called different. It requires you to walk away from rooms that reward your smallness. And here's the hard line. If you need everyone to understand you, you will never fully become yourself. Your growth will always be limited by the least ambitious person you're trying not to offend. Your discipline will always be limited by the laziest standard you're trying not to expose. Your life will always be negotiated instead of built. So ask yourself something real, not rhetorical. Where in your life are you paying the tax of belonging? Where are you shrinking to stay included? Where are you lowering your standards so nobody feels challenged by your existence? Where are you choosing the comfort of the herd over the discomfort of becoming uncommon? Because the price of being accepted by the wrong people is always the same. You lose access to your real power. And once you see that clearly, the loneliness starts to make sense. It's not life rejecting you. It's life pulling you out of a contract that was costing you your future. And when you stop paying that cost, something else rises immediately. Your need to be around people starts to fade, and the fear of isolation starts to loosen its grip. Which takes us straight into the next truth. Your fear of being alone isn't always you. A lot of it is biology, ancient wiring, old survival instincts that are outdated in modern life, but still loud in your nervous system. Your fear of being alone isn't always you. A lot of it is biology. And this is important because if you don't understand what's happening inside you, you'll keep treating loneliness like a sign that something is wrong with you, when sometimes it's just your nervous system screaming at you using an ancient language. For most of human history, isolation wasn't a self-development choice, it was a death sentence. If you were separated from your tribe, you didn't just lose friends, you lost food, shelter, protection. You became vulnerable to everything, so the brain evolved a brutal alarm system. Loneliness hurts. It hurts on purpose. It's designed to push you back toward the group the same way hunger pushes you toward food. It's not sadness. It's a survival signal. But here's the problem. We're no longer living in that world. Being alone today usually doesn't mean you'll die. It means you'll be quiet. It means you won't be distracted. It means you won't get constant reassurance. It means you'll have to face your own thoughts. And that's exactly why the modern mind confuses solitude with danger. Your instincts are using old rules to interpret a new world. So when you feel that tightness in your chest on a Friday night, or that emptiness when you're not included, or that urge to text someone just to feel connected, it's not always a deep emotional truth about your worth. Sometimes it's just wiring, a primal system trying to keep you safe. It doesn't care about your goals. It doesn't care about your future. It cares about comfort and belonging. because belonging used to equal survival. This is why people sabotage themselves the moment they start making progress. They begin building a new life, training, focusing, studying, saving money, changing habits, and then the loneliness hits. The brain interprets the new path as danger because it often requires separation from the old crowd. You stop going out, you stop wasting time, you start choosing early nights and quiet mornings, and the nervous system says, this feels like exile. So it pushes you back toward familiar people, familiar noise, familiar validation. Not because it's good for you, because it's familiar. Familiar feels safe, even when it's poison. This is the war inside you that nobody explains. Your instincts want you safe. Your future wants you free. And those two goals often collide. Because freedom requires solitude, at times. Real growth requires long stretches where no one is clapping, where nobody understands, where you don't get immediate feedback. So the mature move is not to deny the fear, it's to reinterpret it. You stop treating loneliness as a verdict on your value and start treating it as a signal that you're doing something uncommon. You're stepping away from the herd. You're raising your standards. You're changing your identity. And your biology is resisting because it thinks change equals danger. This is also why loneliness often shows up right before a breakthrough, because the moment you start evolving, you temporarily lose the old belonging before you earn the new belonging. You haven't found your people yet. You haven't built the new environment yet. You're in the in-between, and the in-between feels like a void. That's where most people run back. They confuse the void with failure. They confuse discomfort with, this isn't for me. But the truth is, the void is often the training ground. And once you understand that, you stop panicking. You stop making emotional decisions. You stop trying to fill the loneliness with low-quality connection. You stop chasing people just to silence that internal alarm. You learn to sit in it and say, this feeling is not a command. You don't obey it. You let it pass through like weather. That's psychological maturity right there. Not never feeling lonely. It's feeling it and not letting it drive the car. And here's what happens when you do that consistently. The fear loses its leverage. Your nervous system adapts. It learns that solitude isn't death. It learns that being alone doesn't mean you're unsafe. It learns that quiet is not abandonment. It's space. And that space becomes your greatest advantage, because once you can handle being alone, people lose the ability to control you with approval, rejection, guilt, or attention. That's the next chapter. Total autonomy. The day no one can pull your strings anymore. Total autonomy is the day you become emotionally unbribable. And I'm choosing that word on purpose. Unbribable, because most people don't realize how easily they can be controlled until they look at what they need. The more you need people to like you, the easier you are to manipulate. The more you need attention, the easier you are to distract. The more you need approval, the easier you are to tame. The more you need someone to stay, the more you'll tolerate what destroys you. That's not a moral statement. It's mechanical. Need creates leverage. Always. And if you're honest, you've seen it in your own life. You've agreed to things you didn't respect just to stay included. You've stayed quiet about disrespect because you didn't want conflict. You've performed a version of yourself because you wanted to be chosen. You've accepted less than you deserved because being alone felt like the worst outcome. So let's say it directly. If being alone scares you, you are not free. You can call it love. You can call it loyalty. You can call it being nice. But if the fear of solitude makes you betray yourself, then the chains are real, just invisible. Total autonomy starts the moment you stop begging the world to regulate your emotions. You stop needing other people to calm you, to reassure you, to validate your worth. You stop using relationships as life support. And the way you do that isn't by becoming cold. It's by becoming stable. You become someone who can be alone and still feel whole. And that wholeness changes everything. Because now people can't threaten you with distance. They can't control you with silent treatment. They can't hook you with breadcrumb attention. They can't pull you back into chaos by making you feel guilty. They can't buy your loyalty with a little praise, then treat you poorly the next day. Why? Because you don't need their emotional currency to survive. And once you stop needing, you start choosing. That's the upgrade. Autonomy turns relationships from necessity into preference. From I need you so I don't feel empty into I choose you because you add value to my life. And that choice comes with standards. It comes with boundaries. It comes with dignity. This is why solitude isn't just a mood. It's training. It trains you to stop reaching for external soothing every time you feel uncomfortable. It trains you to sit with the emptiness without filling it with trash. It trains you to face boredom without escaping. It trains you to face anxiety without running. And those are not small skills. Those are elite skills. Because once you can regulate yourself, your entire life becomes harder to derail. Let's make it practical. Most people get thrown off course by people, a message, a rejection, a rumor, a comparison, a relationship shift, a social disappointment. They lose focus, they spiral, they lose momentum. Autonomy is when those things still happen, but they don't own you. They don't hijack your day. You don't collapse into old patterns just because someone's energy changed. You know what autonomy really feels like? It feels like quiet confidence, not loud confidence, not performative confidence. It's the confidence of knowing you can walk away and still be okay. And that is what makes you unstoppable, because you can now make decisions based on truth, not fear. Fear makes you slow. Fear makes you compromise. Fear makes you negotiate with standards. But when you can handle being alone, you stop negotiating. You stop saying yes to protect connection. You stop tolerating disrespect to avoid silence. You stop shrinking to avoid judgment. You choose the hard path more easily because you're no longer desperate for comfort. And here's the part people miss. Autonomy doesn't isolate you. It actually prepares you for higher quality connection. Because when you're not begging for attachment, you can finally see people clearly. You can finally love without needing. You can finally respect yourself and still care about others. You can finally be loyal without being weak. So if you want to become unstoppable, this is one of the deepest moves. Stop letting your emotional needs become your prison. Build the ability to be alone without breaking. Build the ability to be quiet without panicking. Build the ability to sit with yourself without needing a constant audience, because the moment you do, you remove the strings. And when the strings are gone, nobody can pull you off your mission. Now, we go to the next chapter, and it's where the results start showing up fast. Because once you're not being dragged by the herd, once you're not losing hours to social maintenance, something happens. You start moving with a different speed. The velocity of solitude. Solitude has velocity, not because being alone is magically productive, but because being alone removes friction, social friction, emotional friction, the constant negotiation that drains time and delays decisions. A crowd can feel like support, but it also becomes a break. Even good people can slow you down without intending to, simply because groups move by comfort, not by truth. Think about how groups make decisions. There's always a pace you're supposed to keep, a vibe you're supposed to match, a standard you're not supposed to exceed too hard, because exceeding it makes people uncomfortable. You feel it when you try to change your life and the room reacts like you committed a crime. You start training and someone jokes about it. You start studying and someone calls you too serious. You start building a business and people say, "Don't burn out." Not because they're evil, because your growth exposes their stagnation. So you adjust. You slow down a little so you don't stand out too much. You skip a workout to hang out. You delay a project to stay available. You keep your goals vague so nobody feels judged. And you don't call it sabotage, you call it being social. But solitude doesn't ask for any of that. Solitude doesn't need you to be relatable. It doesn't need you to be presentable. It doesn't need you to be consistent with yesterday's version of yourself. When you're alone, you can change fast without announcing it. You can raise the standard overnight without negotiating it with anyone. You can cut habits without explaining. You can pivot without defending. You can disappear for 6 months and build a skill that makes your old life look like a warm-up. And that's what velocity really is. Fewer debates, fewer delays, fewer emotional detours. A group moves at the speed of its slowest comfort. It doesn't matter how ambitious you are. If you keep attaching yourself to environments that normalize mediocrity, your ambition will slowly get domesticated. You'll start understanding why people don't try. You'll start relating to excuses. You'll start adopting the average pace. And average pace is the silent killer because it feels normal. It doesn't feel like failure. It feels like life. Solitude breaks that spell because when you're alone, your day belongs to your mission. Your calendar becomes cleaner. Your mind becomes quieter. You stop losing energy to maintaining social standing. You stop spending hours in conversations that go nowhere. You stop being pulled into drama you didn't create. You stop living on other people's rhythm. And then something shifts. You start stacking hours. Real hours. Hours that build you. This is why you'll see certain people transform in a short time, and everyone else thinks it's luck. It's not luck. It's concentrated time. It's time spent in a different environment, an environment where the only feedback loop is action and results, where the only approval that matters is inner approval, where you're not living for reactions, you're living for progress. And the velocity isn't just in work, it's in personal evolution, because solitude forces honesty. You can't hide behind social roles. You can't hide behind being the funny one, or the nice one, or the victim, or the one who has potential. In solitude, you either do the work or you don't. And that clarity accelerates change because it stops the mental games. Now, there's a risk here, and it's worth saying clearly so this doesn't become a cliché. Solitude can also become isolation if you use it to avoid reality instead of build reality. If you use it to hide because you're afraid, it will make you weaker. But if you use it as a workshop, it makes you unstoppable. The difference is intention. One is hiding, one is training. So ask yourself, are you alone because you're being rejected, or are you alone because you're being forged? Those are two different worlds, and the moment you treat solitude as a forge, everything changes. Your loneliness becomes a schedule. Your quiet becomes a routine. Your boredom becomes a doorway into mastery, because that's where the real advantage starts. Once you get quiet enough, you start hearing your own mind again. You start hearing your own intuition without the crowd's noise running the show. That's the next chapter, mental clarity and the death of noise. The first thing solitude gives you is not strength, it's silence. And silence is where you finally meet your real mind again. Most people don't realize how loud their life is until it goes quiet. Not loud in sound, loud in opinions, expectations, constant updates, constant comparisons, constant pressure to respond. Your brain becomes a crowded room. Everybody gets a microphone. Friends, family, timelines, comments, trends, old memories, future worries, and in that noise you can't hear the only voice that actually matters, the one that knows what you need to do next. That's why a lot of people feel lost. They're not lost, they're overloaded. Their inner compass is buried under other people's weather. Solitude clears that. Because when you're alone, there's no performance. There's no need to explain yourself in real time. There's no reacting to someone else's mood. There's no social tension to manage. You're not constantly adjusting your personality to match the room. And all of that creates a weird, unfamiliar emptiness at first. That emptiness can feel like loneliness. But if you stay long enough, you realize it's not emptiness at all. It's space. It's mental oxygen. And in that space, something starts happening. Your thoughts slow down. You begin to notice what you actually feel, not what you pretend to feel. You start seeing patterns you couldn't see before because the noise was covering them. You start realizing which relationships drain you, which habits numb you, which goals are real, and which goals were just borrowed from other people's expectations. This is why solitude is so dangerous to the old version of you, because it removes excuses. You can't blame distraction when the distractions are gone. You can't blame other people's chaos when you're not surrounded by it. You can't blame busy when your calendar is clean. You're left with the pure truth. What do I actually do with my time, my energy, my mind when no one is watching? That question is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. That discomfort is clarity arriving. And once clarity arrives, you start hearing intuition again. Not mystical intuition, practical intuition. The quiet knowing that tells you, this is the wrong path. This person is not good for you. You're lying to yourself. You're wasting your life. You need to move. That knowing is always there, but it gets drowned out when you live inside other people's voices. There's a reason you can have 10 conversations in a day and still feel empty, because noise isn't connection. Noise is stimulation, and stimulation can become a drug. It keeps you from feeling the deeper things: regret, fear, loneliness, hunger, ambition. And those deeper feelings are not enemies. They are signals. They are information. They are guidance. But you only get access to that guidance when you stop numbing yourself with constant interaction. Solitude also kills comparison, or at least weakens it. Because comparison feeds on visibility. It feeds on watching other people's highlight reels. It feeds on measuring your inside against someone else's outside. When you step away, you stop injecting that poison into your mind. You start focusing on your lane. You start asking better questions like, am I better than I was last month? Am I keeping my word? Am I building something real? Those questions don't create anxiety. They create direction. And direction is the beginning of becoming unstoppable. Because once your mind is clear, your decisions become clean. You stop doing things out of guilt. You stop doing things out of habit. You stop doing things out of fear of being left out. You start doing things because they align with what you want to build. That's not a small shift. That's the shift that changes careers, bodies, relationships, and entire lives. Now here's the subtle part. Silence isn't empty. Silence is full of answers, but only if you're brave enough to stay in it long enough to hear them. And once you start hearing them, there's only one next move. You turn clarity into competence. You don't just understand yourself, you sharpen yourself. You build skill, you build mastery. You become dangerous in the cleanest sense of the word. You become capable. That's the next chapter. There's a version of you that is quietly terrifying, not because it's aggressive, not because it's trying to dominate anyone, but because it's competent, focused, and no longer available for nonsense. And that version is not built in public, it's built in private. It's built in the hours where nobody sees you, nobody praises you, nobody checks on you, and you still show up. That's what solitude gives you, if you use it correctly, the chance to become dangerous through competence. Most people build their identity through social feedback. They do what gets reactions. They become what gets approval. They chase the feeling of being seen. But competence doesn't come from being seen. It comes from repetition, from boredom, from doing the same hard thing again and again until your nervous system stops panicking and starts performing. And you can't do that in a life filled with constant social noise. You need depth. You need uninterrupted time. You need a quiet room where your mind can lock onto one target and stay there long enough to actually evolve. This is why the world is full of talented people who are still weak, because talent without solitude becomes performance. It becomes potential. It becomes, I could. And "I could" is the softest sentence in the world. It feels like hope, but it produces nothing. Solitude turns "I could" into "I did." Because when you're alone, you stop spending your best energy on being entertaining, being available, being understood. You start spending it on building. You train, you read, you practice, you write, you study, you lift, you save, you plan, you execute, quietly, repeatedly. And while everyone else is busy performing their life, you're engineering yours. This is where the phrase deep work actually becomes real, not as a productivity cliché but as a psychological weapon. Deep work is what happens when you remove distraction long enough for your mind to enter a different gear. A gear where learning is faster, where skill compounds, where focus becomes addictive. That's the gear that makes someone go from average to elite, not in a year, but in months. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people avoid this gear because it exposes them. In deep solitude, you can't lie to yourself. You can't pretend you're improving when you're not. You can't hide behind being busy. You either sharpen the blade or you keep it dull. So competence becomes your anchor. It becomes your identity. It becomes the thing that makes you unstoppable because it gives you confidence that isn't dependent on anybody's mood. When you're competent, you walk differently. You speak differently. You don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to posture. You don't need to beg. You know what you can do. And that changes how people treat you, even when you say nothing, because the world can feel competence. People sense when someone has a foundation. They sense when someone has self-control. They sense when someone has standards that aren't negotiable. And they also sense when someone is all talk. Solitude is where you remove the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are. It's where you turn identity into evidence. Now, there's a specific kind of power that comes from being competent in silence. It's the power of returning to the world without announcing what you've built. You don't tell people you've changed. You let them discover it. You don't argue. You deliver. You don't explain your discipline. You show results. You don't chase respect. You make it inevitable. This is why unstoppable is not a personality. It's a byproduct. It's what happens when your skills catch up with your standards. So let me ask you a question that hits hard because it's practical. If you had 3 months of solitude, real solitude, not isolation, not depression, 3 months where you treated your life like training, what skill would you build that would change everything? What area, if you became competent there, would make the rest of your life easier? Money, confidence, options, freedom. Because this is the gift of being alone. You finally have the space to become the kind of person who doesn't need a crowd, because your power doesn't come from attention. It comes from ability. And once ability is real, you gain the final power move. The one that ends manipulation, the one that ends dependency, the one that makes you immune to tables you don't respect. You become able to walk away. That's the conclusion we're building toward. The power of walking away without drama, without fear, without collapse, because you are complete in your own company. There's a level of freedom most people never touch, and it has nothing to do with money, status, or being cool. It's a quieter kind of freedom. It's the freedom of being able to walk away. Walk away from a table where you're not respected. Walk away from a relationship that keeps shrinking you. Walk away from a deal that looks good on the surface but steals your peace. Walk away from a room that rewards your smallness. Walk away from people who only like you when you're useful, quiet, and easy to control. Most people can't do that, and the reason is simple. They're not afraid of losing the thing. They're afraid of facing themselves without it. They're afraid of the silence after they leave. They're afraid of the empty space where no one is texting them, no one is validating them, no one is watching them. They're afraid of being alone with their own thoughts, their own doubts, their own unfinished life. So they stay, they negotiate, They tolerate, they compromise, they accept crumbs and call it loyalty. They let fear disguise itself as being a good person. And slowly, their standards get eroded, not in one dramatic moment, through 1,000 small betrayals of the self. But when you've trained in solitude, real solitude, the fear disappears. Not because you become heartless, because you become whole. You no longer need a table to feel like you exist. You no longer need a person to feel worthy. You no longer need the crowd to feel real. That's why realizing you're alone makes you unstoppable. Because the moment you are comfortable in your own company, no one can hold you hostage with access. Nobody can threaten you with distance. Nobody can manipulate you with attention. Nobody can punish you with silence. Their leverage disappears. And that changes how you move through the world. You stop chasing. You stop pleading. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to earn basic respect. You start showing up with a standard. And if the environment can't meet it, you leave. Cleanly. Without drama. Without revenge. Without long speeches. You just remove yourself. That is power. And notice what happens next. Your life starts upgrading. Because walking away is a filter. Every time you walk away from what drains you, you create space for something better to enter. Better opportunities, better friendships, better focus, better peace. But most people never create that space because they're too afraid of the emptiness in between. That emptiness is where the new life is built. There's a Stoic clarity here that never gets old. You can't control what people offer you, but you can control what you accept. And the moment you stop accepting what insults your future changes. So ask yourself honestly, where are you trapped right now? Not by chains, but by comfort. Where are you staying because leaving would force you to be alone? A job, a relationship, a friendship, a routine, a version of yourself. What are you tolerating because the unknown feels scarier than the disrespect? Because the unstoppable person is not the person who never gets hurt. It's the person who refuses to be owned by fear. It's the person who can sit alone, in silence, and still feel stable, still feel purposeful, still feel alive. And that's the final paradox. You were never meant to be carried. You were never meant to be constantly understood. You were never meant to be saved. You were meant to be built. So when you realize you're alone, you stop begging for rescue, and you start designing your life like a builder, and that's why you become unstoppable. If this hit you, hold on to one thought today. The next time you feel yourself negotiating your dignity for belonging, pause, and remember, you can walk away, and you'll survive, and you might finally start winning. The real mistake people make is they treat loneliness like a weather report, like something that just happens to them, something they have to survive until it passes, and that's exactly why it keeps owning them. Because anything you treat as a passive feeling eventually becomes a passive life. But solitude, real solitude, was never meant to be a punishment you endure. It's meant to be a craft you learn, a tool you sharpen, a place you enter on purpose. The same way an athlete enters the gym or a surgeon enters the operating room. Not because it feels good, but because it builds something that can't be built anywhere else. Because once you've learned to walk away, the next risk is obvious. You leave the wrong table, and suddenly you're staring at empty space, and that empty space can either become your workshop or your relapse. It can become the clean room where you rebuild your mind, or it can become the void you rush to fill with anything. Random conversations, low-quality attention, pointless scrolling, situationships, drama. Just to avoid hearing your own thoughts, and if you're not careful, you'll run right back into the same cages you just escaped, not because you love them, but because they're familiar. So the unstoppable move is to turn solitude into structure, to stop being alone like it's an accident and start being alone like it's a plan, which means you decide what that space is for. You decide what you're building in it. You decide what you're protecting it from, because if you don't assign solitude a mission, your brain will assign it a fear, and once fear is in charge, you'll start reaching for distraction like a drowning person reaches for air. Here's what this looks like in a real human life. You create a few protected blocks where your phone is not your companion, where the world doesn't get a vote, where you're not available for everybody's moods and emergencies. And inside those blocks, you do the things that make you harder to stop. Training, learning, writing, planning, working, reflecting. And it sounds simple, but it's rare, because most people have never experienced what happens when you give your mind 2 uninterrupted hours to build instead of consume. And once you feel that power even once, you realize a brutal truth. A lot of your anxiety wasn't who you are. It was the noise you were bathing in. And you also learn a new rule that changes everything. You stop using people as anesthesia, because that's what a lot of socializing becomes when you're not stable inside yourself. It becomes a way to avoid feeling bored, avoid feeling uncertain, avoid feeling your own ambition, avoid feeling your own grief, avoid facing the fact that you've been postponing your life. But solitude forces you to face those feelings cleanly. And when you face them cleanly, they stop being monsters. They become information. They become direction. They become fuel. So if you want a simple way to test whether your solitude is becoming power or becoming pain, watch what you do in the first 5 minutes of being alone. Do you immediately reach for stimulation? Do you immediately need a voice, a screen, a message, a hit of attention? Or can you sit for a moment and stay in your own presence without needing to escape it? Because that's the threshold. That's where the unstoppable person is born, not in some heroic moment, but in the quiet decision to stay, to not run, to not numb, to not beg the world to fill the space for you. And if you need a clean rule to make this practical, it's this: when the loneliness spikes and you feel that urge to reach, pause and ask, am I trying to connect or am I trying to escape? And if the answer is escape, then your next move shouldn't be a message. It should be a small act of building. 10 minutes of training, 10 minutes of reading, 10 minutes of working on the skill that changes your options. Because every time you convert loneliness into construction, you teach your brain a new identity. I don't collapse when it gets quiet. I create. That's the craft. And over time, that craft becomes a kind of calm strength that people can feel without you saying a word. Because you stop giving off neediness, you stop giving off desperation, you stop giving off that restless energy that's always asking the room for permission to exist, and instead you start giving off something rarer, self-contained direction. The kind of person who can be alone on a Saturday night and still feel like they're winning, because they're not measuring their life by company, they're measuring it by progress. And once solitude becomes a method instead of a mood, you start realizing the final secret. You're not alone in the way you feared. You're simply not distracted anymore, and that's where the unstoppable life actually begins. One of the strangest things that happens when you stop running from solitude is that your social world starts revealing itself with brutal honesty, almost like the lights came on and you can suddenly see what was always there. Because loneliness doesn't just make you tougher, it makes you cleaner. And once you're clean inside, you can't tolerate what used to feel normal outside. You begin to notice who only shows up when you're entertaining, when you're available, when you're easy, when you're the version of yourself that doesn't challenge anything. And you also notice who disappears the moment you raise your standards, the moment you stop being reactive, the moment you stop needing them, and that's when the real truth hits. A lot of people don't miss you. They miss access to the version of you that made them comfortable. This is why the early phase of becoming unstoppable can feel socially painful, because you're not just losing people, You're losing roles, you're losing patterns, you're losing unspoken agreements, like the agreement that you'll always be reachable, always be agreeable, always be the one who explains, always be the one who forgives quickly, always be the one who lowers your needs, so the relationship stays easy. And when you start living with more self-respect, those agreements break, and the break feels like rejection, even if it's actually liberation. And here's the part that's hard to admit, but important to understand. Some relationships are built on your weakness, because your weakness makes you predictable, it makes you controllable, it makes you easy to guilt, easy to pull into drama, easy to use as emotional storage. And when you become stable, when you stop performing, when you stop chasing validation, you stop being useful in that way, and the connection starts dying, not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped supplying what was keeping it alive. So solitude becomes a filter, and it's a ruthless one, because it removes the social glue that was really just distraction and habit, and it leaves only what has substance: mutual respect, honesty, real support, shared standards, shared direction. And that's when you start realizing something almost stoic in its simplicity. You can't control who stays, but you can control what you keep welcoming, and the quality of your life is shaped by what you allow to orbit you. This is where a lot of people panic, because they think, if I cut these connections, I'll end up with nobody. And maybe for a season, you will. Maybe there will be a stretch where your circle gets quieter, your phone gets silent, and it feels like you're fading from the world. But what's actually happening is you're detoxing from low-quality connection. And like any detox, it feels uncomfortable before it feels clean. So I want you to ask yourself a question that doesn't lie. When you finish spending time with certain people, do you feel stronger, clearer, and more focused? Or do you feel drained, restless, and slightly ashamed of the version of you that showed up? Because your body will tell the truth, even when your mouth keeps making excuses. And now make it practical, because this can't just be a vibe, it has to become a move. The next time you feel lonely, don't treat it as a reason to run back to the nearest noise. Treat it as a test of standards, and choose one connection in your life to evaluate with honesty, one person, one room, one pattern, and ask, is this relationship building me or bleeding me? And if it's bleeding you, then the first boundary isn't a speech. It's distance. It's fewer replies, fewer explanations, fewer chances to pull you off your path. Because boundaries are not something you announce, they're something you enforce. And what's beautiful, quietly beautiful, is that once you do this, once you let solitude filter your world, you stop being surrounded by people and start being surrounded by alignment. And that changes everything, because now your energy is not constantly being taxed by maintenance and performance. It's being invested into growth and purpose. And you begin to understand why becoming unstoppable is so rare. Most people would rather be included than be free. But you're learning to be free. And when your circle becomes quieter but stronger, when you stop reaching for connection as anesthesia, when you stop tolerating what weakens you, you start feeling a deeper stability, and that stability sets up the final shift. The one that makes loneliness stop feeling like a problem at all. Because once your life has a mission, once your days have direction, you don't experience solitude as emptiness anymore. You experience it as space to build. At the end of all this, the real shift is simple, but it's not easy. You stop measuring your life by company, and you start measuring it by direction, because the moment your life has a mission, something you're building, something you're becoming, something you refuse to betray, solitude stops feeling like a hole in your chest and starts feeling like room to breathe. This is why the most unstoppable people often look alone from the outside, but inside, they're not lonely at all, because they're not waiting to be chosen, they're not waiting to be understood, they're not waiting to be invited into a life. They're constructing one, and construction is loud in the soul, even when it's silent in the world. When you don't have a mission, every quiet hour feels like a judgment. Every silent phone feels like rejection. Every weekend alone feels like proof that something is wrong with you. So you start chasing connection the way a thirsty person chases water. Not because it's meaningful, but because it numbs the fear. And that's how loneliness becomes a loop. You avoid it with noise. The noise keeps you shallow. The shallowness makes you feel empty. And the emptiness makes you crave more noise. A mission breaks the loop. Because a mission gives your nervous system a new signal. It says, this quiet is not danger. This quiet is focus. It turns the silence into a workspace. It turns the boredom into training. It turns the loneliness into fuel. And when you have that, you stop needing the world to constantly reassure you that you matter, because you're creating evidence every day that you matter. Evidence in the form of skill, discipline, health, savings, character, self-respect, progress that you can feel in your body. That's the unstoppable identity you become internally sourced. You stop waking up asking, who is going to make me feel okay today? And you start waking up asking, what am I building today? You stop looking at people as emotional life support and start looking at them as either aligned or misaligned with your standards. You stop performing your life and start living it. You stop announcing goals and start stacking proof. You stop needing to be seen because your mission sees you. Your effort sees you. Your standards see you. And the paradox is that this is the exact moment you become more attractive to life. Not in a superficial way, in a real way. Opportunities begin to stick to you because you're stable. People begin to respect you because you don't chase. Relationships become cleaner because you're not desperate. Your decisions become sharper because you're not trying to please a room. Your energy becomes more concentrated because you're not leaking it into proving and explaining. This is what unstoppable actually means. It doesn't mean you never feel lonely again. It means loneliness no longer controls you. It becomes a signal, not a sentence. It becomes a season you know how to use, not a mood that ruins your week. So here's the final question I want to leave echoing in your mind, because it's the question that determines what happens next. Are you using your alone time to escape from yourself? Or to build yourself? Because if you use it to build, even in small ways, you will wake up one day and realize something shocking. The world didn't have to save you because you saved you, quietly, consistently, without witnesses. And that's the moment you understand the title in your bones. When you realize you are alone, you become unstoppable, because no one can take from you what you built inside the silence. And here's the quiet twist that completes the whole picture, because once you've built autonomy, velocity, clarity, competence, boundaries, and a mission, you start noticing something that almost feels unfair at first. The world doesn't really reward potential, it rewards proof. And proof is usually built when nobody is watching, which means the very thing that used to scare you, the feeling of being alone, becomes your private advantage. The place where you make deposits that other people never even knew you were making, until one day you show up different and they can't explain how it happened. That's why the final stage isn't becoming isolated, it's becoming selective, because you're not alone because you hate people. You're alone because you finally respect your life. And when you respect your life, you stop letting random moods, random relationships, random conversations, and random distractions rent space in your mind. You start protecting your energy like it's the raw material of your future, and you start treating time like something sacred instead of something you throw away to avoid a feeling. And in that final stage, you stop needing the world to agree with you because you've built an inner agreement. And that inner agreement is what makes you unstoppable. Not the absence of problems, not the presence of confidence, but the certainty that no matter what happens, you can return to yourself. You can regulate yourself. You can refocus. You can rebuild. And you can keep moving without begging for rescue, without begging for applause, without begging for permission. So if you want one clean move to carry after this, make it this. The next time loneliness shows up, don't treat it like an emergency, treat it like an invitation. And instead of reaching for noise, reach for one act of construction. One action that makes you more capable, more disciplined, more aligned. Because that's how the feeling stops being a weakness and becomes a signal that you're on the path most people avoid. If this episode hit something real in you, take a second and subscribe so you stay connected to this kind of work. Then pick another episode from the channel and keep building, because the goal isn't to feel inspired for an hour. It's to become the kind of person who doesn't collapse when it gets quiet. And maybe the simplest truth to end on is this: the world can't stop a person who stopped running from themselves and learned to use the silence as a forge. When you become unstoppable, it doesn't look like a hype speech, and it doesn't feel like constant confidence. It looks like a person who can keep moving, even when the inside of their chest feels heavy, even when their mind is bargaining, even when the day is ordinary and nobody is cheering. Because the real difference is this: they stopped letting mood run the government of their life, and they started living under a mission. Most people don't realize how much of their identity is just weather, how many of their decisions are made by the emotional temperature of the moment. Tired means quit, bored means scroll, lonely means reach, anxious means avoid, inspired means promise, uninspired means disappear. And that's why their life feels like a loop, because weather repeats. And if you obey weather, you repeat with it. And then years pass, and you don't even feel like you failed. You just feel like you're still figuring it out, which is a polite way of saying you never built a system that survives your emotions. Mission is the opposite of that. Mission is the part of you that doesn't care if you feel like it. Mission is the deeper agreement you make with your future that says, even when I'm not in the mood, I'm still the kind of person who shows up. And that agreement is what turns solitude from a place of spiraling into a place of building, because when your purpose is clear, being alone stops feeling like empty time and starts feeling like protected time, time that belongs to something bigger than whatever you feel right now. And here's the hard truth that makes this chapter real. The mood-based life is always negotiable. But the mission-based life is not. The mood-based life says, maybe. The mission-based life says, I do what I said. The mood-based life needs encouragement, needs reassurance, needs constant signs that it's working. But the mission-based life keeps going even when it's boring, even when it's slow, even when the results haven't shown up yet, because the mission-based person already decided what kind of person they are, and they don't re-vote on it every morning. This is why the unstoppable person feels different when they walk into a room, not because they're trying to intimidate anybody, but because they're not leaking energy, they're not scanning faces for approval, they're not adjusting their identity in real time to be accepted. They're not quietly panicking about whether they're included, because they've already built a home inside themselves, and the mission is what furnishes that home. The mission gives their life a direction that doesn't change based on who texted back or who didn't, based on who clapped or who stayed silent. So if you're listening to this and you want the simplest way to know whether you're still trapped in the old loop, watch what happens on the days you don't feel good, because those days are not a setback. Those days are the exam. And the exam is always the same question. Do you keep your word when your emotions try to cancel it, or do you treat your feelings like a king and your future like a servant? Because the moment you choose mission over mood, loneliness loses its teeth. Not because you never feel it, but because you stop making it your boss. You stop treating the ache as an emergency that needs a quick fix, and you start treating it as a signal that you're doing something rare, something that requires silence. And instead of reaching for noise, you reach for one act of construction, one repetition, one page, one set, one decision that makes you stronger than you were yesterday. And that's when the identity locks in. That's when you stop being someone who tries and you become someone who executes. And in a strange way, this is where the loneliness you feared turns into the strength you wanted, because you finally understand that being alone was never the thing that would break you. What was breaking you was living without direction, living at the mercy of moods, living as if your best life required perfect feelings. And once you drop that illusion, you become steady, you become reliable. You become the person who doesn't need a crowd to stay consistent, because your consistency comes from something deeper than emotion. So if you want to carry one sentence out of this chapter, make it this: the unstoppable life is not built when you feel powerful. It's built when you feel ordinary and you show up anyway. And that's when the silence stops being lonely and starts being sacred. You don't need a crowd to win. You don't need constant messages, constant approval, constant proof that you matter. You don't need to be understood by everyone around you. What you need is something simpler and harder: the courage to stay with yourself long enough to build a life you respect. Because the moment you realize you are alone, truly alone in the sense that nobody can live inside your body for you, nobody can carry your discipline for you, nobody can take your pain and turn it into progress for you, something changes. The fear starts to drain out of the silence. The noise starts to feel optional. The opinions start to sound smaller. And your attention, for the first time in a long time, comes back home. And maybe that's the whole point of solitude. Not to isolate you from people, but to return you to yourself. To strip away performance. To expose the deals you've been making with comfort. To show you exactly where you've been paying the hidden tax of belonging. And then to offer you a different path. One where you stop begging for connection as anesthesia, and you start using quiet as a forge. So if you've been feeling lonely lately, don't panic. Don't rush to fill the space with noise. Don't go back to the familiar just because it's familiar. Sit with it for a moment. Let it tell you the truth. Let it reveal what you've been avoiding. And then do one thing that turns that silence into strength. One action that makes you more capable, more disciplined, more aligned with the life you say you want. Because that's how unstoppable is built. Not in a dramatic scene, not in a loud announcement, but in small private decisions that compound until you wake up one day and realize you're not the same person anymore. And if this landed, take it with you like a standard. When you realize you are alone, you don't become bitter, you become free. Free from needing approval, free from being controlled by attention, free from shrinking to stay included, free to build, to sharpen, to rise, and to walk away from anything that asks you to betray yourself. If you want more of this, subscribe and explore the other episodes on the channel. And as you go back into your day, remember this: silence isn't what breaks you. Silence is where you become someone the world can't stop.